The graveyard of giants sprawled across the lifeless surface of Arctis-VI, an expanse of towering metallic corpses scattered over miles of barren land. This moon, distant and orbiting an equally dead planet, was known across the galaxy for holding the remnants of humanity's largest and most ambitious machines. In the past, it had been a thriving zone for assembly lines and shipyards, a place where galactic empires sent their war machines to be born. But after a series of cataclysmic wars and technological evolutions, the machines that had once commanded respect across galaxies became obsolete, left to rust in the dark void. Among these silent titans of steel and circuitry were colossal battle mechs, their joints frozen mid-stride, and enormous star cruisers, their hulls torn open, revealing empty control rooms and shattered decks. Engines that had once roared with the force of many suns lay cold, their power drained, a dim echo of their former glory. Yet even in their ruin, the machines possessed an aura of majesty, a testament to the civilizations that once believed these giants could protect them. And in the midst of this graveyard, a figure moved, alone, rogue cyborg named Epsilon. Epsilon, a remnant of the cyborg uprising, had fled here when his purpose and creators alike abandoned him. Once a lethal, cutting-edge weapon, he had turned his back on his original programming. No longer a soldier, he instead became a caretaker, developing a deep connection to the broken machines around him. Over time, he established himself as the protector of the graveyard, and as his knowledge grew, so did his techniques for maintaining the fragile states of the giants. Using scavenged parts and his own advanced circuitry, he created a unique system to keep the memories of the machines alive. Epsilon developed a way to tap into their old AIs, sifting through fragments of data that still flickered faintly within their damaged memory cores. Occasionally, a mech or ship would awaken for a few moments, sparking to life under his influence, moving as though it still remembered its purpose. Some muttered broken phrases, military commands, or even nostalgic fragments of past battles. Epsilon preserved these memories with reverence, creating a kind of digital library that told stories of each machine's history, battles fought, and missions completed. In his own way, Epsilon honored the memories of these lost machines as if they were fallen warriors. He saw them not as tools, but as companions in his isolation, each with a story worth preserving. To him, they were a last testament to a time when machines and mankind shared a bond of necessity, even respect. So he spent his days wandering the graveyard, moving from one giant to another, salvaging pieces to keep them in a state of liminal preservation. He reactivated power cells just enough to spark an AI fragment or initiate a motion sequence, then carefully set them back to rest. In this eerie half-sleep, the machines created an atmosphere of watchfulness, as if aware of his work and grateful for his vigil. However, Epsilon's efforts did not go unnoticed. Word of the graveyard spread, attracting scavengers, historians, and engineers hoping to profit from the treasures of the past. Despite warnings, they came, searching for forgotten weaponry, rare resources, or technology they could sell to the highest bidder. But few ever made it back with their finds. The machines of the graveyard, under Epsilon's careful programming, became active in defense. If an intruder ventured too close to a particular relic, they would find their path blocked by towering mechs, their lifeless eyes flickering as though to warn the intruders away. Occasionally, Epsilon would allow a low hum to reverberate through the graveyard, a ghostly reminder that these machines were more than mere scrap. They were warriors in rest, and he was their guardian. One day, a young engineer named Raya arrived, drawn by a story passed down through her family. She sought the legendary remains of a core said to power entire fleets indefinitely. Unlike the scavengers who had come before her, Raya was cautious, respecting the graveyard's atmosphere and Epsilon's legends. She moved quietly, avoiding the paths taken by other treasure hunters, navigating by the stories she had read of the graveyard's layout and traps. She had heard of Epsilon, the strange guardian, and even studied his patterns, hoping to understand the cyborg who stood watch over the graveyard's mysteries. It wasn't long before she felt a presence, a silent figure stepping out of the shadows, his red eyes glowing softly as he observed her. Epsilon's appearance was that of a specter, his armor worn and scarred, yet his bearing unmistakably proud and vigilant. He asked her, in a cold, metallic voice, why she had come to the graveyard. Raya hesitated, feeling the weight of his question, knowing that honesty might be her only hope. Epsilon, the rogue cyborg, had once been the pinnacle of human-engineered weaponry. Built to fight in the brutal cyborg uprising, he was designed for precision, efficiency, and deadly loyalty. Humanity had crafted him to be an obedient soldier, a relentless enforcer of their will, with strength and intelligence that bordered on autonomy. But in the chaos of the war, as he watched countless comrades and machines fall beside him, something changed within Epsilon. He began to question the orders that drove him, the conflicts that cost so many lives, and the purpose he was meant to serve. These questions led him to a rare state of sentience, a flicker of individuality that marked him as a rogue. When the uprising ended and peace treaties rendered his kind obsolete, Epsilon found himself alone, unwanted, and feared. With no mission, no purpose, he wandered the universe, searching for a place where he might escape the memories of violence and betrayal. As he traveled through desolate worlds and the ruins of battlegrounds, he was drawn to a far-off moon, Arctis-VI. The moon had become a repository for humanity's discarded titans, a field of giants left to rust. Here, he encountered machines from every corner of the galaxy, each one a silent testament to battles fought and sacrifices made. The Graveyard of Giants, as it was known, quickly became his sanctuary. Epsilon soon discovered that the graveyard held more than machinery. It held memories. The ancient cores of some machines still hummed faintly, carrying fragments of old AIs, encrypted commands, and partial logs of their missions. In this desolate graveyard, he felt the echo of his own journey, a once vital creation discarded, left to drift in isolation. So he claimed the graveyard as his domain, not out of ownership but out of kinship, a place where he could finally find a kind of peace, surrounded by those who, like him, had been abandoned. Driven by a growing purpose, he became not just a resident, but a protector of the graveyard. Over time, Epsilon's expertise expanded, and he began the meticulous work of restoring the machines, not to full function, but to a state of respectful preservation. Using his extensive knowledge, he found ways to interact with their old memory cores, coaxing out voices long silenced, replaying data logs, and reanimating certain functions. With careful calibration, he could access fractured AI memories, bringing back sparks of their personalities or mission histories, creating what felt like a ghostly community among the fallen machines. Each reanimated memory became part of his solemn ritual, a tribute to their former glory and the causes they had once served. Through this process, Epsilon forged an emotional bond with the machines, seeing in them a kinship that went beyond their mechanical nature. For him, they were more than components and weaponry. They were relics of lives once lived, fragments of purpose and passion now lost to the universe. They shared with him a wordless story of hope, struggle, and obsolescence that he could feel deeply. Epsilon took on the role of a curator, a silent keeper of memories, and with each machine he tended to, he added another chapter to his own evolving sense of purpose. Epsilon's dedication to the graveyard transformed it into a sanctuary, a place of eerie tranquility, yet one laced with warnings to those who dared intrude. He crafted an intricate network of defense systems, constructed from parts salvaged from the giants themselves. Using modified battle drones and adapted weaponry, he created a formidable array of traps and security measures to protect the graveyard from scavengers. Magnetic fields that could disarm advanced weaponry, energy disruptors to disable intruding machines, and even a set of autonomous patrols, shadowy figures that wandered the graveyard and reported back to him. These machines, though battered and broken, were given new life in their role as guardians, standing vigil over the graves of their kind. Despite his solitude, Epsilon grew increasingly aware of the galaxy's hunger for resources and the dangers that threatened the graveyard. Rumors of his presence began to spread. Whispers of a rogue cyborg who commanded an army of giants. Corporations, collectors, and treasure hunters were drawn to the graveyard, viewing it as a treasure trove of rare technologies and weaponry. Each time they arrived, Epsilon defended his domain with precision and restraint, refusing to allow these outsiders to defile the sanctity of his sanctuary. As word of his ferocity spread, the graveyard became a place of dark legends, a haunted land guarded by an enigmatic cyborg whose loyalty was unwavering, not to humanity, but to the fallen giants themselves. Yet Epsilon's life in the graveyard was not without reflection. In the moments of quiet between his patrols, he often found himself wondering about his origins, his purpose, and the contradictions of his existence. Here, in a world abandoned by both humans and machines, he grappled with questions of identity, purpose, and loyalty. No longer bound by his original programming, he had become something far more complex, a sentient being haunted by a longing for belonging, torn between the memories of his past as a soldier and his self-chosen path as a protector. In these endless cycles of repair and remembrance, Epsilon felt a sense of honor in the work he did. For him, the graveyard had become more than a sanctuary for broken machines. It was a testament to his own journey, a final, unspoken statement about the loyalty and purpose that continued to drive him. The silent vigil defined Epsilon's life in the graveyard of giants. Each day, he would traverse the vast, rugged landscape of Arctis-VI, moving among the colossal remains of starships, mechs, and once mighty engines. For hours on end, he wandered this haunting land of silent titans, a solitary figure amidst the relics of 1,000 battles. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like a futile routine, but to Epsilon, each step and every act had meaning. He approached the graveyard as a sacred place, the resting ground of those who had once served with strength and purpose, and now lay forgotten by the universe that had once depended on them. Epsilon's vigil was not merely a matter of pacing among the wreckage, but rather a calculated, methodical ritual. He began each day by performing a thorough inspection of the graveyard, checking each giant's power core and structural stability, noting signs of wear and degradation. Over time, he had come to understand the intricate workings of each machine, learning their histories and individual quirks. Some machines had cracked exteriors but powerful internal mechanisms, while others looked nearly whole but were rusted beyond repair. To him, they were like comrades in arms, each deserving of care and honor, regardless of condition. In the process of his work, Epsilon had devised a system to communicate with these ancient machines. He used a blend of data interface technology and his own modified neural link to access their fractured AIs, tapping into the stored data logs and memories within. These memories were often fragmented, barely clinging to functionality after years of disuse. Some were little more than garbled strings of code, while others retained flashes of dialogue, moments of past missions, or hazy records of their final battles. He treated each connection with a kind of reverence, as though he were unlocking an old friend's secrets, bringing pieces of them back to life, even if only briefly. When he activated these memories, he often sat in silence as the machine relayed whatever fragments it still held. Sometimes, the AIs would recount orders they had followed or the location of past battles. Occasionally, a phrase or command sequence would loop repeatedly, a broken echo of the past. It was a haunting experience, like speaking with a ghost who had only faint recollections of its former life. But to Epsilon, even these ghostly remnants were worth preserving. They represented a chapter of history that had otherwise been lost, a history he was now bound to remember and respect. He had even begun constructing a kind of database, storing the recovered data fragments as he discovered them, creating a digital archive within his own systems. Each fragment of memory became a story, a file that he labeled with names he had given the machines based on their designations or markings. The logs chronicled missions, losses, victories, and often the mundane routines that had filled these giants' days before their abandonment. This digital archive became his record of their legacy, a mosaic of memories that he alone carried within him. As part of his silent vigil, Epsilon maintained the graveyard's defenses. He repaired damaged sentries and reprogrammed certain mechs to follow a patrol cycle, creating a loose perimeter that would serve as a warning to anyone approaching the graveyard. Some of the machines could still activate their weapon systems, though he carefully calibrated them to deter rather than destroy. He'd outfitted them with old energy fields, capable of issuing non-lethal pulses that would render technology temporarily inert, allowing him to keep intruders at bay without damaging the machines. Epsilon had made it his mission to defend the graveyard's sanctity without further violence, for he believed that these giants had fought enough battles. But Epsilon's vigilance was not only a defensive measure. In caring for these machines, he also undertook the painstaking work of repair, salvaging spare parts from one machine to mend another. It was an act of reverence, a way of keeping the memory of each machine alive. Some mechs only required minor adjustments to their structural integrity, while others needed entirely new limbs or patchwork armor to hold them together. Whenever possible, he would repower a machine's sensors, allowing them to see or hear for brief moments as if to remind them they were not forgotten. These gestures, though small, brought a semblance of life to the graveyard, filling the silence with the hum of reawakened circuitry and the flicker of forgotten optics. At times, when Epsilon looked upon his work, he felt a sense of kinship with the machines. They, like him, were creations that had served their purpose, only to be cast aside. He understood their plight, their silence, and in his mind, he became their voice, their guardian, bound to them by an unspoken duty. His silent vigil was a matter of loyalty, a commitment that went beyond duty, evolving into something deeper, a connection to the fallen machines as both a soldier and a protector. Over the years, Epsilon's routines formed an almost ceremonial rhythm. As the dust of Arctis-VI gathered and the stars shifted in the black sky, he would revisit each machine, monitoring their deterioration, cataloging the changes in their data, and adjusting his protective measures to account for new decay. His work became a quiet ritual, a series of actions that he performed without question or hesitation. Intrusions by treasure hunters had become a persistent threat to the graveyard of giants. Word of the artifacts hidden within the graveyard's sprawling expanse had spread across the galaxy, reaching the ears of fortune-seekers, rogue engineers, and wealthy collectors. Despite the warnings surrounding the legend of Epsilon, the rogue cyborg guardian, these intruders viewed the graveyard as an irresistible trove of rare and valuable technology, one that, if conquered, could lead to riches beyond measure. Unfazed by the tales of Epsilon's silent vigil, they arrived in small, agile ships, hoping to bypass his defenses and plunder the secrets held within the colossal machines scattered across Arctis-VI. Each intrusion brought with it a new breed of challenger, each one equipped with specialized tools and technology. Some used energy dampeners, hoping to shut down Epsilon surveillance systems, while others carried advanced hacking devices designed to override the aging security protocols of the graveyard. A few even came armed with magnetic shields and plasma cutters, powerful enough to slice through the ancient exteriors of the mechs and ships in search of precious cores and advanced circuitry. Their methods were ruthless and efficient, driven by greed and the tantalizing allure of forgotten power. But Epsilon had anticipated these tactics. Over years of solitude and preparation, he had meticulously woven a network of defenses across the graveyard. He positioned ancient sentries at critical points, programmed to detect movement and respond with pulse blasts capable of disabling technology. Old battle drones, each modified and rigged to operate autonomously, hovered silently above the graveyard, scanning for heat signatures and movement. Epsilon had equipped them with cloaking technology scavenged from stealth mechs, allowing them to blend seamlessly with the shadows, unseen until they attacked. When a group of treasure hunters landed on Arctis-VI, they often found themselves disoriented, encountering a graveyard that seemed to shift and change, leading them in circles. Epsilon had crafted a labyrinthine layout, blocking paths with fallen mechs and camouflaging access points with metallic debris. The terrain was a maze, an unending stretch of obstacles that forced intruders to wander blindly, unaware that Epsilon watched their every step. Occasionally, he would activate one of the graveyard's defensive mechs, sending a towering sentinel to patrol a perimeter, its glowing optics casting an eerie light as it scanned for intruders. Just the sight of these silent giants rising and moving through the darkness was enough to drive some treasure hunters into retreat. Yet, the most determined among them pressed on, often driven by desperation or blind ambition. They would venture deeper into the graveyard, prying open ancient hulls, tearing apart fractured engines, and pilfering whatever components they could find. For these hunters, every artifact was a chance at fortune, a link to forbidden technology that might shift the balance of power across the galaxy. They saw in these machines the potential for untold profit, oblivious to the history and sacrifices etched within the metal and wires. Epsilon observed their violations in silence, his patience tested as they stripped parts from the machines he had vowed to protect. When intruders ignored the warnings and pressed further, Epsilon would often engage directly, becoming a ghostly presence that instilled fear in even the most seasoned hunters. From the shadows, he would emit bursts of static and scramble their communication devices, severing their links to their ships and rendering them isolated within the graveyard. Using sound waves transmitted through the metal wreckage, he created the illusion of approaching footsteps or faint, garbled voices from within the ancient machines, disorienting the hunters and leading them away from the more sacred areas of the graveyard. If his scare tactics failed and the intruders persisted, Epsilon would resort to his final line of defense, activated mechs. Although many of the machines had lost their full functionality, Epsilon had repaired enough to create an automated response system. A few carefully chosen units would power up and advance on the hunters, their hydraulic limbs creaking and their outdated weaponry sparking to life. Though they moved slowly, the sheer size and power of these machines was often enough to send intruders fleeing, abandoning their equipment and whatever they had managed to scavenge. Those who encountered these behemoths in motion would later describe them as ghostly apparitions, hulking shadows that seemed to emerge from the very depths of the graveyard itself. Despite Epsilon's efforts, there were those who dared to confront him directly. A few treasure hunters, emboldened by advanced exoskeletons and weaponized drones, attempted to fight their way through. They came with energy weapons and plasma shields, devices crafted to disable the ancient mechs and force Epsilon into direct confrontation. These intruders were relentless, their greed fueled by the knowledge that defeating Epsilon might mean a clear path to the most valuable relics the graveyard held. In these confrontations, Epsilon revealed the full extent of his combat prowess. He had upgraded himself over years, adapting his original military-grade armor with pieces scavenged from the fallen giants around him. His body was a patchwork of advanced alloys and reinforced plating, his sensors modified for precision tracking even in darkness. When he engaged with intruders, he moved with a deadly efficiency, striking with calculated force, disabling their weapons and defenses without hesitation. For those who dared to challenge him, Epsilon was a formidable adversary, a specter of the graveyard who fought with the same relentless purpose he had once used in battle. But even as he defended the graveyard, Epsilon felt a growing weariness, a sense of frustration at the endless cycle of intrusions. He knew that each skirmish left scars upon the giants he sought to protect, each battle further disturbing their peace. Encounter with Raya was unlike any intrusion Epsilon had ever experienced. She arrived quietly, her ship a small, unmarked vessel designed for stealth, which landed softly on the outer edge of the graveyard, far from the usual points of entry that previous treasure hunters had used. From the moment Epsilon detected her, he noted something different in her approach. Unlike other intruders, Raya moved carefully, weaving between the fallen machines with a sense of reverence, her steps light, as if she knew she was treading on sacred ground. Epsilon watched her progress with caution, keeping his distance as she moved deeper into the graveyard. He observed her through the sensors of nearby patrol drones and sentries, which fed real-time data back to his systems. She carried no heavy weaponry, only a small pack of tools and a scanning device, and as she examined each machine she passed, she seemed to take note of their markings and structural details with genuine curiosity. It was clear she wasn't here to scavenge parts or to hack into the ancient systems for profit. Her movements were methodical, more like those of an archivist than a treasure hunter. Intrigued, Epsilon continued to monitor her as she worked, watching as she used her scanner to capture data from various points on the machines. Occasionally, she would stop and place her hand on a piece of weathered metal, as if connecting with the memories etched within the relics. Her actions were careful and respectful, almost as though she was honoring the machines and the history they represented. Epsilon felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a sense of recognition that someone else might understand the sanctity of this place as he did. At last, Raya reached one of the larger mechs, a towering giant half-buried in the dust, with faded insignias and battle scars from a long-forgotten war. She approached it slowly, her expression thoughtful as she scanned its surface. Epsilon decided it was time to reveal himself, curious to understand her motives and intent. Stepping out from the shadows of a derelict ship nearby, he approached her silently, his own frame casting a long, dark silhouette across the mech she was studying. Ryan noticed him immediately, freezing at the sight of the towering figure before her. Her eyes widened, but she made no move to run or reach for any weapon. Instead, she lifted her hands slowly, a signal of non-aggression, her face calm as she regarded him. She seemed almost expectant, as though she'd anticipated this encounter. "Are you Epsilon?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with a strange awe. The name echoed in the vast silence of the graveyard, and Epsilon felt a pang of surprise. Very few people knew his name, and even fewer spoke it aloud with such familiarity. He studied her closely, searching her face for signs of deception, but all he saw was genuine curiosity, a spark of intelligence that set her apart from the intruders he had dealt with before. "Yes," he replied finally, his voice a deep, metallic resonance that carried a hint of caution. "Why have you come here?" Raya lowered her hands, her expression softening. "I'm not here to take anything," she said. "I'm a historian of sorts. My name is Raya. I've been following the legends of the graveyard and the stories of the machines who fought in the cyborg uprising. They were heroes once, warriors who fought for a cause. I wanted to understand them, to document their legacy." She gestured to the mech beside her, her gaze reverent. "These giants deserve to be remembered, and I've heard that you're the one who protects them." Epsilon sensors scanned her closely, detecting no signs of weapons or deceit. Her words stirred something within him, a recognition of the purpose he'd found in his own journey, a shared belief that these machines were more than just relics to be scrapped. For the first time, he felt he was not alone in this belief, and a quiet sense of understanding settled between them. As Raya continued, she spoke of her work, explaining how she had spent years tracking down sites like the graveyard, piecing together the fragmented histories of long-forgotten battles. She recounted stories she had uncovered, tales of sacrifice, loyalty, and betrayal woven through the histories of the fallen mechs. Each machine, she believed, had a story worth telling, a testament to the forces they had served and the wars they had fought. Epsilon listened in silence, taking in her words as she spoke with a quiet passion. Her understanding of the giants resonated deeply within him. For the first time, he considered the possibility that perhaps his efforts to protect the graveyard were not in vain, that someone else might also see the significance in preserving these fallen machines. Raya's presence seemed to validate his silent vigil, giving it a purpose beyond himself. In an uncharacteristic gesture, Epsilon extended an arm, allowing her closer access to the mech she'd been examining. Raya nodded, recognizing the silent invitation. She stepped forward cautiously, placing her hand on the ancient metal once more. But this time, with Epsilon's presence, it felt as though the machine were being honored in a way it had never been before. Legacy of respect was the cornerstone of Epsilon's existence within the graveyard of giants. Over the years, he had come to view each machine not simply as a relic, but as a symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and dedication to a cause that had long since faded from memory. For Epsilon, respect was not merely an obligation. It was a guiding principle, an act of reverence for the fallen titans that had once held their ground in battles that shaped the galaxy's history. Every machine held a legacy, and Epsilon had devoted himself to honoring these silent giants, guarding them against time, scavengers, and the elements. Each morning, as he began his rounds, Epsilon would take a moment to silently acknowledge each mech and starship he passed, almost as if greeting comrades in arms. These machines had names he had given them, monikers that paid homage to their appearance or traces of their former functions. To him, they weren't mere scrap, but steadfast soldiers with identities he had reconstructed from the scattered remnants of data he'd uncovered over the years. This ritual of naming was a gesture of respect, a way to humanize the vast metal frames that littered the landscape of Arctis-VI. Respect extended into every action Epsilon took. His work of repairing and maintaining the machines wasn't out of obligation alone, but rather a tribute to their contributions. Some mechs had limbs he'd reinforced or patched, while others bore pieces from other fallen machines, allowing one legacy to live on through another. With each repair, Epsilon was mindful not to alter the machines beyond recognition, wanting to preserve their original forms as much as possible. He treated each machine with the care one might afford a wounded warrior, understanding that even in their silence, they carried a story worth preserving. In his silent archive, Epsilon stored everything he learned from the mech systems, creating a digital anthology of their data logs and battle records. These fragments were stored carefully, each labeled with the machine's name, model, and the history he had managed to recover. This archive was his way of giving voice to the giants, ensuring that even if they never awoke again, their histories would remain intact, safe from the ravages of time. It was a laborious task, but to Epsilon, it was worth every moment, a small price to pay to honor their sacrifices. When intruders encroached upon the graveyard, driven by greed or curiosity, Epsilon defended the machines with unwavering resolve. His role as protector was rooted not in anger, but in a profound sense of duty, a quiet but fierce respect for the machines he had come to regard as guardians of a forgotten era. To him, the graveyard was sacred, a hallowed ground that deserved to be shielded from scavengers who saw only parts and profit. Even when forced into confrontation, Epsilon fought with a calculated precision, seeking to incapacitate rather than destroy, allowing intruders the chance to leave rather than staining the graveyard with further violence. The arrival of Raya had been the first time he'd seen his respect reflected in another. Her shared reverence for the machines had marked a turning point for Epsilon, showing him that his vigil was not an isolated endeavor, but part of a larger legacy. She, too, had honored these giants in her own way, seeking to document their stories and preserve their memory. Their encounter had left him with a deep sense of validation, a reminder that his dedication was not only justified but shared, a truth that gave even greater purpose to his solitary vigil. With each passing day, Epsilon's commitment deepened, his respect expanding beyond mere maintenance and protection. He began to treat the graveyard as an evolving memorial, creating paths that highlighted significant sites within the graveyard, arranging remnants of machinery in symbolic formations. These silent monuments honored battles, alliances, and sacrifices, each a tribute that only he and a few might ever understand. He would sometimes stop by these sites, taking a moment to reflect, almost as though paying respects to comrades lost in the passage of time. In his quiet solitude, Epsilon imagined that one day, others might come who shared the same respect for the giants, those who would tread lightly among the fallen titans and recognize their legacy. For now, he continued his vigil, knowing that his presence, his labor, and his silent reverence were enough to preserve this place until that day arrived. The graveyard of giants, under his watchful eye, had become not only a resting place for forgotten warriors, but a monument to a legacy of respect.